All right. Well, let me know if you can hear me, if everything's working. Type something in the chat. Now that it looks like I actually have a viewer.
Where's it posted?
I put it in the announcements in Slack. I also put it on the website.
The video is definitely working, but I don't have the audio on because I don't want to.
All right. F said it can hear me. So cool. All right. So should we give people a minute or two to?
Yeah, you should play a couple songs while people trickle in.
Yeah, yeah. What should we play? Does anybody do the 7 o'clock thing around us?
No.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody.
Yeah.
Oh well.
I think that's just for people who have like stacked, really high apartment buildings where they can all hear each other out the windows.
Yeah. Not so much the case here. All right. Okay, so let's chat about some medleys. All right, so we've been doing a medley every season so far in Here to Sing, and sometimes two. And I know some people have asked specifically about how to go about arranging medleys and mashups, and like what are the details that you need to consider to be able to put things together. So I figured we would take a look at least at first, the pink medley, and if we have time, maybe we'll take a look at the other medleys that I've done as well. Where is there my notes? Okay. So, okay. So for me, as far as like the terminology I use, I consider it a medley if you kind of have separate songs, like you kind of got this song and then you have this song and then, but they kind of like transition into each other. I kind of consider that a medley, whereas a mashup, I kind of consider more when like things are happening at the same time or possibly like interleave, like one and then the other and then the first and then the other, going back and forth potentially. So yeah, so like for example, this pink medley, I call it a pink medley because it's like you have kind of like the five main songs, but it kind of turns into a mashup at the end when I'm putting other songs on top of it. So yeah, so that's just kind of the terminology I use. So for medleys, um, and really for like the choir in general, it's like I like to use the original keys of the songs. You don't have to. I know Ravens changed the key, for example, for Brown Eyed Girl. Um, the key was changed for that, and that was partially to like fit people's ranges and like based off of where she was gonna put the parts, putting the melody in what part and the harmonies. But generally speaking, I try to see if I can work with the original key. So I don't usually dive too much into changing keys, and this goes for medleys as well. So for medleys, like I'll pick the songs that are like the main songs in the medleys, but um, I'll try to keep them in this whatever the original key was. So and like some of the reasons for that is like you generally speaking you're going to find if you're going to find an instrumental track it's probably going to be in the original key. Now karaoke version does have a nifty feature that you can change the key of the song, but if you start to get like too far off of the key sometimes it can sound a little wacky, and even so just having the song in a different key sometimes it just gives a different sound to it. Sometimes it doesn't quite sound right. Sometimes it does, and I don't know. Sometimes you just gotta play around with it. But generally speaking, if I can avoid it, I tend to avoid it. So, yeah. Now, when you're putting together a medley, obviously this depends on how many songs you're trying to fit in and how long how long a medley you're trying to make. But obviously, you have to consider how much of each song you want to use. You want to have enough to kind of be like a satisfying amount of the song, but you don't want to make it too long because you want to keep things fresh and changing. Like that's a lot of the fun of medleys, and that's why like medleys and mashups tend to do well is because it always keeps things fresh. You're never like getting bored of the same song or anything like that. You're always changing it up. So you want to make it like not too short but not too long, a happy medium. And so by default, a lot of times what ends up being useful is a verse and a chorus, and and for example like the Pink medley that I made, that's most like pretty much all five of those songs tend to be like just about a verse and a chorus. The ending song we'll talk about later. The ending song I kind of extended a bit, and sometimes there's an intro that goes with it, but generally speaking, we've got the verse and the chorus, and that's kind of a decent amount to get the idea of a song across. Now, for something like the Winter medley last time, I fit a ton of songs in. I've something like 7 songs in there, so some of them are a bit shorter than that. And so it kind of depends on the medley and depends on the specific songs, like what feels like it's enough for in the Winter medley, the Winter Wonderland part, I felt like my little like half a verse or whatever you call it, half a chorus was enough. So and wanted to keep moving because there's a lot of songs to get through, so that was enough for that one. So you have your medley in mind, and maybe you decide on your songs, but then you have to figure out what order you have to put them in. So some things to consider when deciding on the order of their songs for the medley. You might want to think about, okay, are there any of these songs that make particularly good openers? Are there any songs that make particularly good closers? Some songs kind of like they kind of hit you right away. For example, in the Journey medley, I started with Any Way You Want It because that's kind of like a nice big in your face intro. It seemed like it would make a good opener. They use that. They've used that for like the various commercials. Like there's some like car company I think that was using that song for a while. I think because it kind of is a good like opening. It's like oh wow we're here kind of thing, and I thought that was good for the Journey medley. And good closers for let's see this Pink medley. This the blow me one last kiss. I felt like that was a satisfying way to end the song. It's got like a very big high, a very big sound in the chorus, so I thought that would be a nice closer. So considering openers and closers, and then more things you consider is what would make a good transition. And in some cases, this can have to do with the keys the songs are in. If one key flows well into another song, the key that another song is in, maybe you might try to fit those two together. If you have a song whose key doesn't really go very well into the other song's key, there's usually some way to make it work. But if it seems like it might be difficult, then maybe you might consider moving it to a different part of the song. And you also want to potentially think about the tempos of the songs and the meters of the song. So, and what I mean, if you're not sure what I mean by meter is, so for example, in the Journey medley, when we go to the Lights song, when the lights go down in the city, it's like three of these clicks for every big click, right? And the lights go down in the city. That's in a triple meter, is what they call that, as opposed to a lot of the other songs. Any way you want it, that's the way you need it. Any way you want it. It's a more like even 2 or 4. And so keeping that kind of thing in mind, and like what songs that can influence what songs you might that might help you transition between songs, and also tempos. Like for example, I tend to put slower songs in towards like the middle of the medley, like to like start big, end big, get some of the slower, feely stuff in the middle of the medley, and yeah, and I tend to like group them together because they'll transition nicely. And some songs maybe start fast and slow, or start slow and fast, and that could be a good way to transition from slow songs to fast songs, or vice versa. All right, and then obviously one of the more difficult parts is of making a medley is how to actually make the transitions. So there are some sort of medleys out there which it's like they're technically a medley in a sense because it's like you're not stopping before doing the next song, but they're kind of like the lightest form of medley because you can just like end one song and then begin the next song, but it sometimes can feel a bit nicer and more creative if you have some sort of transition so that it flows from one song into the next. So yeah, and like there are certain circumstances in which it makes sense to just end a song and then begin the next song, but you don't want to do that too much, or else it's just like, okay, you sang this song and then you sang this song and then you sang this song. Whereas if you do more transitions, it makes it more like a medley. And we'll talk about there was a point in the Pink medley where I did kind of stop the song and then start the next song, but based on the feels of the songs, it made more sense to do that. So yeah, so normally I like to make them flow from one song into the next song, and sometimes the way that sometimes in order to achieve that, it can help to adjust what the vocals are doing. You don't have to stick to everything that the vocals are doing has to be in the original song. Sometimes you might change the vocals a bit to help the transition along, whether that has to do with changing the notes so that it better fits a sort of key transition, or to like even change like things like repeating a line or chopping a line early. All sorts of things you can do to like potentially have a creative transition. So yeah, and then you have to figure out how you're going to get out of one song and into the next song. In terms of, and it's one thing to just kind of be like, okay, this feeling goes into this feeling, but getting from the key of one song into the key of another song, especially if you're keeping them in the same key like I tend to do, that can be a little tricky. So you want to try to locate chord changes that sound good, and that can be a little ambiguous, and rightly so, because there's going to be a lot of like not so strict rule. Like there are some guidelines that you can go with, but otherwise it's just going to be like what happens to sound good. So sometimes if you're going from like if you have a nice transition that kind of makes sense, if the chord, if like the first chord of one song is in the key of the previous song somewhere, it doesn't have to be the root chord, but somewhere in the key of the previous song, then that can make a fairly easy transition. So let's say we're going into from like a song that's in G, and we want to get to a song that's in C. Okay, well, maybe like the song that's in G, maybe it goes G, D, E minor, C, G, and then maybe we transition into C, and that's a pretty easy transition because the C chord pops up a lot in the key of G anyway. So that kind of transition could be easy. Now, sometimes you can make this a little stronger, a little more like pulling your ear towards the new key if you make some adjustments. So I think both Raven and I have talked about dominant 7 chords, at least to a certain, maybe not with that terminology, but so like you let's say we're in the key of G, and they call the D chord, that would be the dominant chord. And part of what a dominant chord does is it leads into the G chord. It leads you back to the main key of the song. But another thing you can add, if you add the 7th to the D chord, which is in this case a C, that even more strongly leads your ear towards the following G chord. So let's say we want to go from G to C. If we were in the key of C, then the dominant chord is a G chord, and we would add the 7 to make it a G7 chord leading to C. But a G7 chord might not normally appear in the old song in the key of G. Because normally you have an F sharp in the key of G. But if you change it, so it's still a G chord, but you're changing it to a G7, that can really lead your ear to the key of the new song, which in this case is in C. So there are some tricks like that you can do, and you can potentially use that kind of idea to change to various kinds of keys. In other cases, sometimes that's not necessarily the best way to set it up. Sometimes just like a different kind of chord change can be useful. And something that I found happens to work out very well a lot is when the notes in the chord are changing by a half step. So we'll talk about this a little later, but in the Pink medley, going from the first song to the second song, I'm going from a D, like the first song is in G, and that's kind of like the way I'm ending that song. The new song is in the key of F sharp minor. And one reason that I end the last song on the D rather than the G chord is because a D chord you can keep. So a D chord has a D, an F sharp, and an A. D, F sharp, A. An F sharp, well, that's in both the D chord and the F sharp minor chord in the new key. So the F sharp can stay the same. The A is in both the D chord and the F sharp minor chord. So the A can stay the same. The D is in the D chord, obviously, but it's not in the F sharp minor chord. So if you take the D and lower it a half step, you get a C sharp, which is the other note in the F sharp minor chord. So that is a very easy chord change, a very, very reasonable chord change for our ears to hear, because most of the chord can stay the same. So even though F sharp minor is not at all in the key of the first song, the chord change still works because it's only a difference of a single half step. So the chords are actually very close to each other. The bass note changes, but that's kind of a different point. I'm just talking about like the main part of the chord. Almost the same chord. So those are some things to consider. So now that we've talked about some general things, let's specifically look at the Pink medley. Unless anybody has a comment, so just see S has a comment here. Nice. All right, so let's take a look at the Pink medley. So first, in doing this Pink medley, I had to decide what songs am I going to use. So what I ended up doing, and I don't necessarily suggest this because this took a while, I listened to pretty much every single single that Pink released throughout her career so far. And I kind of listened to them all and figured out, okay, do I recognize this one? Do I think that other people are going to recognize it? Do I think that it will make a good material for the choir to sing? And yeah, and like, just does it sound fun to sing? Does it sound cool? So, and keeping in mind that the main songs are probably going to get just a verse and a chorus. It's probably not going to have, like sometimes you can have like a bridge or a particularly cool transition. You can stick those in medleys, but typically we're going to have a verse and a chorus, so you consider that. Also, just considering the songs that I personally like. Because if I enjoy the songs that I'm arranging, I'm probably going to arrange it better. I might end up making it more fun rather than like I don't know. I can get over my like dislike of songs probably, but I might be less likely, or maybe I'll be more. I don't know. Maybe I'll be more likely to make it interesting because I need to make it more interesting. But if I have a better attitude about it, that I feel like that might help. So and to a certain extent, yeah, I was choosing songs that I personally like. But then like I had like plenty of choices that I thought would be good. So then I used some of those other contenders for the main part of the medley, and instead of making them a main part of the medley, I had them as an extra little bit. So, okay, so the song, so I decided on 5 songs, and so the songs that I ended up using, the first one that I ended up using is Raise Your Glass, which is in the key of G. Most of these songs ended up being in the key of G, just the way it worked. So Raise Your Glass is in G, and it felt like a good opener. Like I felt like the I don't know, the intro I felt like made a good intro. It's got the guitar starting it off. It's kind of like ramps up fairly quickly, and you have the hard like percussion hits and the big note to start off the verse. Seemed like a good opener, as good as any of these songs would be. So yeah, so I decided that could make a good opener. So I decided to use the first verse, and I ended up using instead of just the first chorus as is, because in the original, the first chorus is kind of like a sort of teaser chorus. It's shorter than the other choruses, but since we're doing a medley, we don't have time to do multiple choruses. I used the longer version of the chorus, which might be like the second chorus or the third chorus or something like that. Yeah, I know. I'd like to sing all these Pink songs again, right? Hopefully soon. Hopefully before too long, but not too soon. Not too soon. We don't want to push things. Yeah, so I used probably the second chorus of the song because it would be like a sufficient length and make it a little more satisfying to end it there rather than feel like, oh, I feel like we ended too soon. It seemed like a better amount. So the second song I chose was So What, which is in potentially the verses, the intro and the verses are kind of in F sharp minor. The choruses are kind of more in A major. They're very related keys. They're very close. So essentially, it's I wouldn't really call it a key change, but it's changing from minor sounding to major sounding. So yeah, so that's the one song in this medley that is definitely in a different key. And so for this song, I decided to keep a little bit of the intro to kind of kick us into the song, but I did shorten the intro because I felt like the whole thing wasn't necessary. Wanted to get moving on, get to the rest of the song. First verse, first chorus, that's it for that song. It worked out fine. Next, we transitioned into Just Give Me a Reason, which is kind of like the slow song, the ballad of the medley. We're back to the key of G, but it's got some interesting chords that we'll talk about. I'll be talking about the transitions in a little bit between the songs. But yeah, so this is the slower song. I'm using the intro from the very beginning of the song. But then I actually transition into the second verse because that's where they have the sort of duet starts happening. Because the first verse and the first chorus are just Pink singing her stuff, and so I felt like it made more sense with the choir to get the duet harmonies going on. So I chose to go right from the intro into the second verse, and then using probably the second chorus, maybe it was the third chorus, I don't know. Yeah, and then transitioning into Perfect, or Effing Perfect, also in G. And this song, I particularly chose to put this after Just Give Me a Reason because Perfect feels like it starts slow and calm, kind of like Just Give Me a Reason is, but it feels like the chorus is bigger and like kind of is a good, so it makes a good transition from the slow feel of Just Give Me a Reason into the fast energetic feel of Blow Me, which was the last song. So Perfect ended up being a good transition. It was a good way to branch between the slow section of the medley and the fast ending, energetic ending. So once again, I used a verse and a chorus, and that seemed fine. And then to the last song, Blow Me One Last Kiss, also in G. It feels like a good closer. To me, I kind of particularly like Blow Me One Last Kiss, partially because it feels a bit different than most of Pink's current material, like maybe not current, like most of Pink's material around that era that these songs are in. It kind of has a different feel, and I really like the way it feels. So, and it's got a really big chorus and ending, so I felt like that would be a good closer to use. So for this, I'm using the intro because I really like the intro, the first verse, the chorus, and then because I knew I was going to be adding extra stuff into this in some way or another, I decided to kind of extend this one. This one's a little longer than the rest of them. We have the ending little interlude and the additional half chorus at the end. So that makes space for all the extra bits. Okay, I'm gonna take a drink. Feel free to make some comments, and then we are going to talk about how I actually make the transitions between the songs. Feel free to ask questions. So let's take a look. So, song one, we've got Raise Your Glass, goes along, verse, chorus. Oh, that's still the verse. There's the chorus. Raise your glass, raise your glass. The extended ending that happens in the second chorus. And then we have a little break. So we don't have anything fancy vocally necessarily to do here. I didn't have the vocalists. The vocalists are not responsible for this transition so much. So so we're going from Raise Your Glass into, what are we going to? So What? So the intro and the verses of So What, there's not a huge amount of variety in what's happening as far as the chords go in So What. So basically, we kind of know we're going to need to transition to that F sharp minor chord that the whole intro and first verse essentially are. Yeah, there's not really any other chords with that song. So we know what we're transitioning to. We're ending on the F sharp minor chord. Now I scrolled too far in my notes. Yeah. Now the chord, we're ending with the chorus in Raise Your Glass, and the chords there we have a G, D, C, C, E minor, D, and potentially we could go to the following G chord, and that could be our ending. So potential good chords that we could end with. We could end on make G the last chord of that song. Or we could go raise your glass. We can make D the last chord of the song. Or if we wanted to, we could change it up and decide to go halfway through that chord progression. Raise your glass. Just come and raise your glass. Once you're coming and raise your glass. And like maybe you could use that chord, the C chord, to transition into the next song. So those options that we had, the G chord, the D chord, and the C chord, those are kind of our main options to end Raise Your Glass. And we want to get into an F sharp minor chord. So you might think, okay, G, F sharp, those are a half step away. That seems like that could make a good transition. And in some cases, you'd be right. Because like if we were going from a G, a song in G, and like you don't need a huge transition necessarily to just go down a half step. However, a little quirk there, I went from a G chord to an F sharp major chord. But here we're going from a G chord to an F sharp minor chord. And that does actually change things a bit because instead of just going down a half step for all the notes in the chord, we're going down a half step for a couple of notes of the chord and down a whole step for another note of the chord. Now, if you don't know what any of that means, it doesn't necessarily matter because you just kind of play around with it and see if it seems to make sense. So if we're going from F sharp minor, it's a bit of a different feel to it, and I don't know, it probably could still work, but it didn't feel like the strongest possibility, so I didn't end up going with that. C, very much. That would be a very interesting transition to go from a C chord. Maybe you might choose to use that in some circumstances, but it would certainly give it a very different feel, and not really a feel that I wanted to go into. So I decided probably what was best to do was to go from the D chord. And like I was saying earlier, the D chord and an F sharp minor chord are very, very close. These two notes are the same in both chords. It's only this middle note, or the D, goes down to a C sharp. That's the only difference. So this ended up being a very good transition. And I decided it didn't need any alterations past that. We're early enough in the medley. I don't feel like I need like things to be like super strong and satisfying. We can still leave things a little, I don't know, a little more, I don't know, little more wacky. I guess it's really not that wacky, but it doesn't have like the super strong key change transition. But it's good enough that I felt like it worked for this point in the medley. Coming in, raise your glass. And we're right into the song 2. And yeah, as far as I'm also going to talk a little bit about how I went about doing the track transitions. So the track of the first the first song, Raise Your Glass, at the very end of it, coming in, raise your glass. To me, it basically it kind of has a note on the bottom end, and otherwise just kind of like ends pretty simply with just like a little percussion hit and some like reverb that holds some things out. So I decided that I wanted to keep that like ending like percussion hit. I didn't want it to like be super like it's a sudden transition, but I didn't want it to be like we've got all this percussion going on, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, suddenly there's nothing. I kept the following percussion downbeat on top of the intro to So What. I kept the percussion on that so that I could at least do a sort of a little bit better of a transition. It just sounds a little better to not have the percussion stop quite so suddenly. Yeah. So yeah, and I already mentioned how vocally the vocals It's not too hard for the vocalist because you've got the intro to So What. By that point, everyone knows exactly what they're about to sing because they're singing exactly that line. So we didn't need to do anything fancy to get the vocalist there. So that was despite being in different keys, it wasn't too hard of a transition. And then, going from So What is the second song into Just Give Me a Reason. All right, so we've got verse of So What, chorus of So What. So what? I am a rock star, got my rock blues, I don't want you tonight. Now, this one obviously is a significantly different transition because I do have the vocalists making this transition with the track. So let's take a look at the chorus for So What is kind of in A major. It's, so so like A could be a good chord to end on, or the D could be a good chord to end on, or maybe you might kind of pretend like it's transitioning back into the verse, and you might end on the F sharp minor chord. So options as where to end: A, D, F sharp minor. Those are possible chords that those are some good possibilities to end So What with. And starting Just Give Me a Reason, the verse starts, it's in the key of G, and the verse starts right on the G chord. I'm sorry, I don't understand. So G could be a fine chord to start with. But there's also a nice little intro that I felt like might be good to use, and which is a little more complicated. But the intro starts on an E minor chord, so I felt like the E minor might be a good option. And then also, this could be another good starting point. C on the C chord here. Sometimes I don't use the whole intro, so very possibly I could have chosen to just use that last bit of the intro, and that could have worked out okay. So G, E minor, C, those are some of the options that we could start the third song with. So some of these options, you might note, let's see. So one of those options that you could see, we could end on a D chord and go to the G chord. And this is definitely a valid transition that we could do. And maybe you might need to like adjust the vocals a little. I'm sorry, I don't understand. And that would be okay. But I was talking earlier about how like the dominant seven chords can lead you to whatever key you're going to. So D is the dominant chord of G, which is the key we're going to. But it would be even stronger if we could make it a D7 going into G. But it doesn't work quite as nicely to do that in this case because in So What, as the song's going along, there's a synth part that's like happening. And particularly right there where we would be ending the song, the synth is playing a C sharp. And so like maybe I could like try to adjust something to make it play a C natural instead, which would make it a D7 chord that leads to the G. But decided I didn't want to like change the feel of those, and it might be difficult to just change part of the track. You can with like karaoke version, if you download the parts separately, I could potentially adjust just the synth part to make it land on a C. But didn't want to mess with the song quite that much. So the D major 7, it's not quite as a strong lead into the G of the new key. So decided I didn't want to go with that. However, if we look at the intro, one thing, so a lot of pop songs, the chords will pretty much stick to the key of the song and they don't really venture outside of that. Any of these songs that you would call like 4-chord songs, those typically are all in the normal key. Every note of all those chords are in the key of G. But this intro has a unique thing, and it ends up popping up in what we call accidentals. So for example, at this section here at L, because the chords that are happening at L are the same as what is in the intro. So you notice how the tenor and bass part have this little sharp marking, and that's to indicate that this C is not in the key of G that the song is in. The C is sharp. It's a C sharp, which is not directly in the key. And so this pops up in the chords that are being used. So what's happening, we start with an E minor chord, which is in G, but the next chord is an A chord. And A major is, if it was sticking to the key of G, then you would have an A minor chord. A major is not technically in the key of G. And one reason to do this is to like make it feel more exciting, to have something new, a note that is not heard in the rest of the song. It can be very fresh and new sounding to the ear. It sounds very nice. And sometimes, like in this case, this particular chord is what it, as far as music theory goes, it would be called a secondary dominant, because it's kind of like, it's kind of saying we're temporarily in the key of D. Because that C sharp, the C sharp is like the unusual note, which leads you to D, which also happens to be the next chord they use. So this, at this point of the song, it's kind of like the song is saying, okay, temporarily, let's pretend like we're in the key of D temporarily. This actually ends up being very useful for this transition, because if we think about it, the previous song is in A or F sharp minor. Either way, it's got 3 sharps. The key we're going to ultimately, just give me a reason, is in the key of G, which has 1 sharp. This secondary dominant chord, the A chord, that chord leading to D. So like I said, it's kind of like saying we're in D. Now the key of D has 2 sharps. And this sounds like a perfect transition, and indeed it kind of is, to go from 3 sharps to the temporary 2 sharps to the actual key, which is 1 sharp. So this intro actually serves as a really good transition. So we're in the key of 3 sharps, A, it's like we're in 2 sharps, and then we go kind of transition back into the actual key, which is 1 sharp. And so it serves as a really good transition. Yeah, and in addition, what another reason to go to do that I decided to do that transition is the end of the chorus. While that last chord of the chorus, D, F sharp, and A are the notes of that chord. But the vocal line actually goes up to right before it goes back down to tonight. It goes, and I don't want you. It goes up to a B, which is not normally in a D chord by default. But a B is in the E minor chord that we're going to. So that was another reason in which this transition made sense because the vocal line even leads us into the following chord. And so, yeah, but we didn't. I didn't want to like cut off the vocals super suddenly and just have them stop. And because this B kind of started creating this transition, I decided, okay, well maybe we'll adjust the ending of this chorus so that it fits with the following intro. So not a 1, 2. Normally it would go back down to tonight. But since we're not going to that chord, 1, 2, tonight. That way I could have the melody end on a B, which is in the new chord. So I tweaked the melody line just for that transition. And then I have the vocals. The vocals make the transition as well. Now, one thing to note is that the and another reason why I did this is because the start of the intro, and the start of Just Give Me a Reason is much more empty. It's softer. It's slower, and I decided to have the vocals continue and sort of do a sort of transition mesh into it. That way we aren't going suddenly from big and fast, all of a sudden soft and slow. This way we're kind of keeping the big chord sound, but transitioning. We're getting softer as we go. Where's this area here? Let's go back here. Yeah, so this part right around J, we're going from the fast part of the previous song. This measure is still in the fast part, and we're transitioning. By here we are soft and slow like the new song, and we're taking this time to transition to get softer and sort of mellow out more with these nice chords, nice chords. Yeah, so I wanted the vocals to help make that transition, but we also want to keep things we want to make things easy for the vocalists. And maybe like somebody in a previous week was like asking what would be different if we were arranging for a professional choir. Maybe in a professional choir we wouldn't need to avoid tough key changes, putting tough things into the vocal parts for something like this. But I decided to avoid trying to make any sort of like tough note jumps, the tough key changes being directly caused by the vocals. So we're going to an E minor chord, which is made up of E, G, natural, and B. Now E and B are in the previous key fine, but G natural is not in the previous key. So if you note, the first note of J, I don't have a G natural because it's not in the previous key. The vocals are not singing a G natural. I have them singing the E and the B because those are in the previous key. But I avoided having them sing the G natural because that would be harder because they just came from another song that has a G sharp fairly strongly. So yeah, so that's something to consider when you're doing vocal transitions. As far as the track goes, the chorus of So What is significantly louder than I've mentioned a couple times. The chorus of So What is significantly louder, but this is true for the track as well. The track is significantly louder as opposed to the intro of Just Give Me a Reason. So I didn't want it to be quite such a sudden change. So if you've noticed, I actually started fading, like a partial fade out at the end of that chorus, so that it wasn't quite as huge of a change. So yeah, so the second song starts to fade out, and then the intro to Just Give Me a Reason. But I wanted the second verse, so I had to kind of like piece that together. I had to because the intro right before the second verse is not nearly the same as the intro right before the first verse, but I wanted that first verse intro. So I took that and basically I kind of faded in what happens right before the second verse. So we have the intro plays and then fade in the right before the second verse, and there's a percussion hit that happens right before the second verse happens, and that's where I decided to actually cut off the intro and say, okay, we're fine. We're like definitely in the second verse now. And yeah, so that's how we got into the third song. Now, go through that song, verse, the little pre-chorus bit with the vocals, and then the chorus, which is, yeah, which has the harmony parts like the second chorus. And then we are into the fourth song, which is Perfect. Now, this is kind of this situation. Both of these songs, they're both in G. There's really nothing that this makes it significantly easier. They're both slow songs. They're almost the same tempo. Like I put tempo markings here, and if you see this song, Just Give Me a Reason, has a tempo of 95, and this next song that we're going to has a tempo of 92. Now, even if you have no clue what that actually means as far as what do those numbers mean, you can still notice that 95 and 92 are still really close, and indeed these tempos are very, very close to the same thing. So they're both the same amount of slow, I guess you could say. So they're both kind of like a slow feel. The way the Just Give Me a Reason and kind of empties out at the end. It ends kind of emptied out, and the new song Perfect starts emptied out as well. So that all these things are just helping make the transition really easy. Same keys, same feeling, same kind of amount of busyness going on, not very much. So, yeah. So because, and so in going to the Perfect song, the first verse starts very much empty, like I said. And because it starts like basically from nothing, like the vocals literally kick the song in. So because it starts from nothing, this was a situation in which it kind of made sense to sort of end Just Give Me a Reason and then go into the next song. This is the slow part of the song. It feels nice to just take a little pause. There's like a measure where there's nothing happening. And then we start the new song, and it makes sense in the middle of this song. It's like kind of like the low point of the song, of the medley in a sense. I could have overlapped them. That could have made sense. Let's. So I could have overlapped the two songs like that, but I decided to have that extra pause in there, and that's, I don't know, it was just a decision I made. Another arranger could have made a different decision, not necessarily one that's better, one that's right, one that's wrong. It's just whatever the arranger happens to feel like works at that moment. And as far as the track goes, so in the Just Give Me a Reason, the second and third choruses, which is kind of what I was using the track from, they transition into something else. So in the second chorus, and we can learn to love again. The second chorus goes into the bridge, and the last chorus, and we can learn to love again. The last chorus goes into this little sort of, it's like the intro copied at the end, essentially, is the little outro. And I decided we didn't really need that. We had the intro as the intro. We didn't need the intro as the outro as well. We weren't going into the bridge. So I wanted to just kind of end the song on like the root chord. So I took a listen to the track, and I'm like, oh, well, the very, very end of the song, after it does the little intro bit again, it ends on that chord. So I decided to literally just take that last chord and plop it at the end of the chorus. And that was how I decided to end the song. And then the next song just starts. Didn't really need to do much of any overlap. I guess technically there's probably a little bit of an overlap because the last song needs to like fade out. I didn't want to like all of a sudden, because you can, even when the note is technically, you've played the last note, it's still being held out, so you could hear if I just all of a sudden cut it off. So it still kind of like fades out. But essentially, there's not really any overlap or transition that needs to happen there. You just end that song, begin this song. Is it because it's in the same key? I didn't need to do anything fancy vocally either. So yeah, because we end on the starting chord of the next song, so it was nice and easy for the vocalist. Okay, and then coming, let's see, perfect. We have the verse, and we'll talk about the extra bits a little later. And the chorus. And then we are transitioning into Blow Me, One Last Kiss. I'm going to take another drink break briefly. People who are talking for an hour constantly need a drink. All right, so this transition, once again, these two songs are in the same keys again, which makes it easier. So, so what are we? And like, if I wanted to do this sort of like end a song, begin the next song thing, I could have done that kind of thing. Like you're nothing, you are perfect to me. And then I could have started the next song. But I didn't want to do too many of those like total end, total starts, so I wanted to transition it, so I had to go directly into it. And even going directly into it, I could have decided to skip the intro and go right into the verse. That would have made perfect sense. Like you're nothing, you are perfect. White knuckles. Na, 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 na. That could have made sense. I could have done that. However, I like the intro to Blow Me, so I decided to use the intro to Blow Me. What is... Oh, yeah, Alan's commenting about the drink thing. Yep. So, yeah, so I like the intro to Blow Me One Last Kiss, so I decided I wanted to keep that. So I decided to transition into that intro. Yeah, and well, obviously I added some vocal bits. Like, technically, during that intro of Blow Me One Last Kiss, there would not be vocal stuff going on. But because it's in the same key, I added stuff in. It works out nice and easily. As far as the tracks go, now the beginning of "Blow Me One Last Kiss," I'm gonna just try to play just a tiny bit of this. By the way, my last video talking about Treasure got flagged as being like, "Oh, you're using this clip of this song. Oh, that means we can take any we can put ads on your video and make money off of it." And so that's why I want to avoid doing too much of this, playing the actual tracks, to try to avoid that if possible, but whatever. So anyway, Blow Me sounds like this at first. It has that sort of gradual build up to the first hit where the intro happens. And I decided to make use of that, and I basically just layered that on top of literally I didn't fade out. I didn't really fade out the previous song at all. I just had it end. I basically just had it go through the chorus and let's see, perfect to me, and I just kind of had it end at the end of the song in a sense, and I just overlapped that little. I just overlapped the sort of whoosh up. I just overlapped it onto the end of the chorus, and it worked out for a good transition. Let's see if I can pull up the. So once again. So that's the beginning of Blow Me. And if you can, I'll try to play that part of the track that I put together. So here's the last chorus. The last bit of the chorus is perfect. Like if you listen closely enough, you can hear the sort of whoosh sound start to build up while that other song is still playing. And I just decided that worked really well to sort of kick us into the last song. Okay, so that's the various transitions. And okay, so next I'm going to talk about the all of the extra bits that I put in, and which is kind of like the mashup part of this. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. But I'm going to take a couple minutes, well, like a minute. I'm going to take a drink, let anybody ask questions who has them, and I'll read the chat as well. And yeah. By the way, I don't know if any of you have been like looking at my YouTube channel in the past few days, but I've started to upload myself playing songs from this book. And yeah, I'm gonna try to upload all of them, but I've uploaded the first 3 already the past 3 days. So if you feel like checking it out, they're really fun jazz Nintendo. Yeah, it's like you take Mario Brothers and make it jazz, and that's basically what this book is. So if you feel like it, you can check that out. Okay. So, the extra little bits. Where's my notes? They're there. All right, so the extra little bits that I added that kind of make this the second part of this song, the second half of this song, sort of more mashup-y. And one of the reasons why I have them all in the second half of the song is because I kind of rushed the first half of the song out because I was like, oh, we gotta sing this. So let's see. Oh yeah, okay. Before I get into that, Mona asked a question, so let me talk about that. Yeah, "Blow Me One Last Kiss." Like I don't know, like the like a lot. Like, I don't know, like I feel like the a lot of her songs, at least some of those other songs, they are a bit. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Like the feel of it. I feel like the sort of like the sound of the guitar and the type of like synth sounds used are kind of different for "Blow Me One Last Kiss." Like the some of the other songs, like "So What," has like a very like and yeah, "So What" and "Raise Your Glass," they both kind of have like a hard synth sound, like the synth going, or in "So What." Uh, and they kind of have like a more hard type of synth sound, and the I feel like the guitars tend to be um, a little more like a hard poppy guitar, whereas the I feel like "Blow Me One Last Kiss" is it's a bit different. Like it has a more like a pad, like an airy pad sound rather than the hard synth sound, and like the guitar is more of like it's the was it the it's like the sound of the guitar there is like a different kind of guitar sound, and I don't know, like some I don't know. I'd have to think about it more, but something about the song it just feels different to me. All right, so the mashup-y bit, yes. All right, so yeah, so part of the reason why I put the mashups all in the second half is because I was rushing out the first half. Anyway, it gave me more time to actually concentrate on the mashups in the second half of the song. So I had to figure out which bits would fit well into the sounds of it because I knew I was using these 5 songs were going to be my main songs, And at this point, I already released the first three, so I'm not going to add any mashup bits into the first three songs. So it's really just the last two songs that I had to figure out, okay, what bits of other songs can I fit into the way that Perfect sounds and the way that Blow Me sounds. So, yeah. And when in deciding how to use these mashup bits, this is the kind of thing where it's like I feel totally free to change the key of whatever the thing I'm referencing. I feel totally free to change the key of that, like largely because I'm just taking the melody. It's really easy to just stick the melody in a different key. I don't have to worry about any sort of like weird track quirks that happen. I don't have to worry, and it's not the main focus of the song, so it's not going to be a big deal if it doesn't quite sound like the song, because that's not the point. It's not really the point to have the same feel as the song I'm referencing. It's just a reference to the song. So yeah, it's totally fine if it's in a totally different key. It doesn't really matter what key it comes from, and this can be like, depending on how into the details you want to get. This is where like sometimes music theory, the various like the Roman numeral chord stuff like 1, 4, 5, 1, that kind of stuff, that can help figure out how you actually want to take this bit into this bit from this song into this song. But other than that, a lot of times it can you can just go by what it sounds like. So yeah, and if it happens to be over chords that after you change it to the correct key, if the chords happen to line up, great. That probably means it'll work great. Or even if their chords are close, that still is probably going to be good enough. But because you're only taking the melody, it's actually quite possible for the chords of those two songs to be very different, and yet the melody from this one still fits over the chords to the main song that you're in. And this actually ended up happening a lot in the Pink medley. So one reason for that is that a lot of times it's like we talk about, oh, we want to make the harmonies should be like in the chord and the melody notes, and we think about like the melody. If you're writing a song, you think about maybe the melody should dance around the notes of the chord that you're currently playing. But there's a lot of and this is kind of like a generic thing, but and like I've noticed with these Pink songs, a lot of these melody lines, they don't necessarily follow the chords exactly. Like the notes are not necessarily on the chord that is currently being played. In sort of a more general sense, they tend to be bouncing over the main key. So like if like a lot of these songs were in the key of G, so we'll stick to that. So we're in the key of G. And we're going to be playing, all right, so in the key of G, we've got G's, B's, and D's. So in a lot of these songs, a lot of the melodies, a lot of the notes in the melody are going to be a lot of G's, B's, and D's. But it even does this even when the chord being played is not a G chord. We can be on a new chord, but it's still playing the old notes. Next chord, same notes. Next chord. So when the melodies are fitting around the root chord like that, that kind of helps them fit over the new song, even when the chords are totally different than what is in the one it came from. And yeah, and like I mentioned, this happened a lot in this medley. Yeah, and like in addition to like the chords, you can also consider what is the melody that is being sung in the new song at that time, and you might want to avoid direct clashes. Sometimes they'll be fine because they're distinct enough, but it's just something to consider. But basically, the short version is just sing the little bit that you're thinking about adding, over the original song and see where it works and where it doesn't work and put it where it works. And that's that's kind of mainly what I did for this. And you might be able to you might like tweak the bit to you might tweak some of the notes to make it better fit the chords of the new song if you need to. But in a lot of cases you won't need to. But I like, for example, in the Journey medley, I did do that when we got to the ending bit with the bassist doing the whoa, is what they would go to if I had copied the song exactly. But because I wanted to better match the chords of Don't Stop Believing, which was what it was happening over, I changed it to let's see, we're in this case. Normally it would be but that doesn't sound as good. It doesn't really work as well. So I decided to tweak the little bit for that medley. I don't think I ended up needing to do that in the Pink medley. I considered it, but I ended up not. So let's talk about these little bits. So let's look at, okay, yep. So this is the first little addition that we have. So, okay, so let's just say, okay, the chords in the main song, perfect. Once or twice, dug my way up, blood and fire. And I think so that's G, D, E minor, C. It's like a basic 4-chord song. 1, 5, 6, 4. G, D, E minor, C. Over and over again. And I think that happens like for the whole song, basically. Mystery, this place misunderstood. This no way it's all good. It didn't slow me down. And like the chords have like slight alterations depending on where they are, and even in the chorus. Please don't you ever feel like you're less than perfect. So the whole song is those 4 chords. So we're just keeping that in mind. So, okay, so the first little bit I'm adding here is the la 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 la, which comes from Glitter in the Air. And if you think about like the original where this comes from, it's a significantly different feel of the song. Like the Glitter in the Air is like a it's like a triplet feel. Well, what I put this into is not a triplet feel at all. But it still worked okay because this particular bit, la 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 la, it only has the strong beats anyway, so I didn't need to worry about how it was subdivided differently. Even if it was, I could probably make it work anyway, but I just didn't have to worry about it here because it was only the strong beats that were being used anyway. So, but with the song, like the way the chords are in the original, it's like it's something like that. The chords change really fast. And the chords in what we're going into don't change fast at all. It's band is alright, but it doesn't change chord until there. And whereas Glitter in the Air will have done 4 chords by then. So it's not so the chords aren't really matching it up at all. But if you look at the notes that are in this melody, what do we have here? We've got the first measure is like dancing around a B, which is in the G chord. And the second measure is also dancing around the G. So both of those measures are kind of dancing around notes that are in the G chord. And perhaps partially as a result, it ends up sounding fine. So normally it's whereas on top of these chords we have totally different chords, but it works out. And the original probably wasn't in G, but I'm just kind of transposing it to G just because that's the key of the song that we're putting it into. Yeah. So like when Yeah, so like when I was talking about the notes, la 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 la, la, that's after already transposing it into the new key. Yeah, so that's that first bit. The next bit we've got is, yeah. Oh, and another thing that helps this a little bit is because some of these notes are a little interesting, like we've definitely got like an F sharp in that chord, but we're playing around a G. But I think another reason why this worked here is because the instrumentation for this song is sparse enough that it kind of leaves it like it's not going to clash as much because it's a little more spacious. It's got the so singing the G on top of this D chord works out okay. Okay, the next bit, I Can't Stand Your Life Support from Like a Pill. So the original here, if we again, like when I say what these chords are, this is all after transposing it into the current key, which is G. So here we've got can't stay on your life support, there's a shortage in the switch. If we were in the new key, if we were using the chords of the old song but in the new key, it would be I can't stay on your life support, there's a shortage in the switch. It's around those chords, which are not at all the same as what it ends up becoming, which is I can't stay on your life support, there's a shortage in the switch. I can't stay on your life, it's making me itch. Not at all the same, but it works anyway. And once again, quite possibly because let's take a look at the notes of this melody line. We've got we're dancing around a lot of B's and D's, which are in the G chord. So once again, the melody line is dancing along like the root chord of the song. So it kind of works over whichever typical chords. Let's see. The next bit is try. Just because it burns doesn't mean you're gonna die. You gotta get up and try. So there we go. All right. So, and you may have noticed that this little bit is kind of interesting because the timing of it is actually different. Because normally, just because it burns doesn't mean you're gonna die. Try. Just because it burns. Like that would be the downbeat. But if we, and like potentially we could try to do that with like, so that was the actual bit is from the original song. Just because it burns doesn't mean you're gonna die. Try. But and we could try to put this over the new chords just as is. But just because it burns doesn't mean you're gonna die. Get up and try. It could work. Now, if you were to compare the chord progressions of the two songs, you would actually notice that moving the stuff from Try, if you started it a bar earlier, the chords actually line up perfectly. Because just because it burns doesn't mean you're gonna die. That second chord there, that's the same as the first chord of mistaken, and like from that point, it would actually match up chord-wise. So we could potentially have started it even earlier and been like, just because it burns doesn't mean you're gonna die. Gotta get up and try. But this kind of like, especially because I already have this bit of I can't stand your life support, etc., because it's making me itch. We'd be overlapping it with yet another song if I were to start it even earlier. So instead, what ended up working out, I ended up starting it later, which really doesn't help too much with as far as like the chord progressions. It's not like they line up better with the melody line starting a bar later, but it just kind of like worked out for it. Kind of makes the melody line fit pretty well. Maybe like the melody line might fit, the chords don't necessarily fit better, but the melody line kind of fits better. And also it kind of like leaves this space for this, because it's making me itch, that ends, and then we start the new reference. And also that pushes the try into the little silence between the verse and the chorus, which I thought was really cool. So try. And you can imagine it finishing off the word try, which the basses kind of take over. Instead of saying try, they say run. But yeah, I thought that was kind of cool, and it wasn't something that I was like, okay, I'm going to do this because of these musical reasons. No, it was more just because of like just playing around with it. It's like, okay, I want to insert this somewhere. Where can I put this? And it was like, oh, hey, if I insert this, if I change the timing of this and make it a bar later, it actually ends up working out pretty well. So yeah, so it was not like a magical musical reason. It was just what I happened to like. Okay. Yeah. And then into the chorus of Perfect. And we're back to, what is this? Just Like a Pill. Now, let's see. Just Like a Pill, we've got, we'll run just as fast as I can. Now, it's the same chords as what we're doing, but they're in a different order. Run just as fast as I can, to the middle of nowhere, to the middle of my frustrated fears. That's different than run as fast as I can, to the middle of nowhere, to the middle of my frustrated fears, and I swear. So they're technically different, but it kind of sounds fine either way. Once again, the melody line is dancing along this G pretty much the whole time. And once we get into Frustrated Fears, it's dancing on all of the notes in the G chord. So once again, the melody is dancing around a G chord, so it kind of fits over all of these things. And this, yeah, just partially just a property of a lot of these Pink songs is just the way they are. Okay, and then going to No Pain Inside, No My Protection, I don't feel this good, sober. All right, so this bit would be over no pain inside, no my protection, I don't feel this good, sober. Significantly different chords than no pain inside, no protection, I don't feel this good, sober. Very different. Oh, I did get the words right. Cool. Very different, but once again, dancing around a B, which is again in the G chord, so it works out. A lot of these things just kind of worked out like that. Okay, so now we're into Blow Me One Last Kiss. So I decided, hey, well, if I like this intro, and we're going to play this intro, maybe I won't have the vocalist just sit there for 4 bars. So I decided to add some bits into the intro of Blow Me One Last Kiss. So the first thing I added is this. And it would be, which is from Please Don't Leave Me. And when it happens in the chorus, it would be, which is close, but not quite the same as what the intro to Blow Me is. So again, Please Don't Leave Me is. But in this case, we have Blow Me. It's. It actually ends up like it's different chords, but it actually fits, I think, really well. Partially because of the so that note there. kind of like happens at a perfect time because that's right when the chord in Blow Me changes. And it happens to be in the correct in the chord in the new song. So it ends up, I think, working out really well. And also kind of the note that it ends on is also in the chord that Blow Me is at that point. So it worked out well. And then we have the little bit from You in Your Hand, which is You don't really wanna mess with me tonight. And this, let's see, In You in Your Hand, let's see. Let's see. You don't really wanna mess with me tonight. So that's what it would be in the in You in Your Hand. You don't really wanna mess with me tonight. But here we've got totally different chords once again. You don't really wanna mess with me tonight. But again, it kind of works out because like so and taking a look at the notes, it's like it doesn't quite. This is not so much the situation of playing around the G chord because we've kind of got like the A and the F sharp seem to be a bit of the focus in that mess with me tonight. That's not really so much in a G chord, but it kind of works out anyway. We've got the in Blow Me, the chord that's happening over the You Don't Really Wanna is an E minor chord. You don't really wanna, and a B does work out there. You don't really wanna mess with me. Now, this is kind of interesting though. Me tonight, that F sharp is not in the chord that is happening. But the reason why I think it works out here is because one of the things that the F sharp does, as we've kind of talked about a couple times, it's the note that is just a half step below the root of the song, the G. It's a F sharp is a half step below G, so it kind of leads you to the G. And that's why I think it kind of works in this case, is because we're going to a G chord and a G in the melody. So I think it works because of that. You don't really wanna mess with me tonight. Works out. All right, and then the next bit. What about all the times you said you had the answer? Right away we can see this is definitely going to be playing off of the notes of the G chord. G, B, G, D, B, G. Those are like almost all of those notes are in a G chord. So regardless of what the chords actually are, it's probably going to work, and indeed it does. So in this case, the original is what about all the times you had said you had the answer? But in this case, it's what about all the times you said you had the answer? Significantly different, doesn't matter, works. One of the reasons why I chose to use this particular song here is because it fit. If you look at the melody line of the main song, pause. Sweaty palms from hanging on too tight, clash on jaw. Pause. Another, whatever the words are. There's a little pause in the melody line that happens both of these spots. And one of the reasons why I chose these particular bits to put here is because they kind of fit that gap really well. And if you were like there's a good reason to have gaps in your melody line so that your singer has a chance to pause and to like also not constantly bombard people with sound constantly. Although some songs like the chorus of this song, the pre-chorus and the second half of the verse and the chorus of this song totally do bombard you with the whole thing and singers die while they're singing. but the verse at least gives you a little bit of space. But since we've got a full choir and we can do this in this part and this part, I felt free to add something into this little break. So I had the sopranos, what about all the times you said you had, which totally fills that gap. So they're not kind of overlapping, they're not interfering with each other quite as much as they could. And then the next bit. I'm coming up, so you better get this party started. So once again, since I just was talking about it here, once again, this was a bit that I felt filled the gap in the melody line pretty well because a lot of the main stuff happens during that rest. Now, this is kind of a really weird situation because if you were to take Get the Party Started, and if you were to transpose it in what you would probably call the new key, you would probably transpose it from the old key into the new key, you would probably make it be over an E minor chord. And so it would be, I'm coming up to you better get the started. And that whole song is like one chord. So it would be all on an E minor chord. I'm coming up to you better get this party started. So the section of the song that we're currently in, again, is like, what do we do? There's an E minor chord. So there is a bit of E minor. So potentially I could have plopped it over into that key, and probably I could have fitted in like that into that key. I'm coming out, but you better get this party started. If we were to try to do that, it sounds a little weird, but like stick with me for a little bit. I'm coming out, but you better get this party started. After the first note, it actually works out pretty well. I'm coming out, but you better get this party started. So, because that first note sounds weird, one of the things that I could have done, I could have maybe adjusted that first note to make it match the key. We're in a G chord. E doesn't fit very well over it, so maybe we'll change it to a D because that is in the chord. So then it could become, I'm coming up, so you better get this party started. That would have been a perfectly valid way to do this. However, yeah, and another thing that I could have done, I could have like started it halfway through. So let's say because halfway through Blow Me, the chord progression in Blow Me, halfway through that starts on an E minor chord. So potentially starting there could make it work out. So let's pretend we're doing that. Coming out, so you better get this party started. And it kind of would work to do that too. But I actually noticed that I didn't have to, I actually did not end up changing the key of from what it came from. Now, it came from what is most definitely a B minor song. But if you were to call that part of a major song, which works well in pop music, it would have been part of a D major song. So, it would be like if it was in the key of D. So potentially, yeah. So it's like this. It's like this melody line is still in the key of D, but it actually ends up working out. D at least is pretty close to G. G is one sharp. D has two sharps. They are very close keys. So it's not like it was like a wildly different key. It's even though it's like a significantly different key, but it's not like wildly different. It's one sharp versus two sharps. And it just so happens that it works out. I didn't think about this until now. So the second sharp in the key of two sharps is a C sharp. But the melody line, I'm coming up, so you better get this party started, never hits that note. So it ends up being okay to put it in this other key, even though it's not in that key. So, normally it would be, coming up, so you better get this party started. But in this new context, it's, coming up, so you better get this party started. suddenly makes it sound like it has this major feel to it, and this is really cool. It's really I really was like happy about how well that ended up working out. Um, yeah, and originally I was considering coming up, so you better get this party started. I initially was considering keeping that bit ending on the B. Coming up, so you better get this party started. But after singing through it, I decided that just felt unnatural if you know the original song. So I ended up saying, okay, fine, even though let's start started, even though that A is not part of an E minor chord, I went with it anyway. And because I decided it just felt too unnatural not to, and I decided it didn't conflict with the chord enough to justify doing that. So, and yeah, so if we think about it, like, why does that work so well? Well, we've got this melody line here. Yeah, from there to there, the first notes here. I'm coming. Hey, what do you know? That happens to be the notes of a G chord, which happens to be the chord of the song we changed to. It's the original is a B minor chord, which is close to a G chord, but it doesn't have that G. But this happens to have that G, which works out well. And then during Up So You, Blow Me does change to a B minor chord, which is the chord that Get This Party Started is in. So it ended up working out there. And this is kind of once again landing on that F sharp right when the B minor chord hits. I feel like worked well earlier. I think it works well here too. And then the next bit, Blow Me has an E minor chord. Better get this party started. Those are very nice notes to have along any E minor chord. A is not ideal to end on, but once again, I talked about that already. Okay. And then we kind of had a break from doing all these little bits. I decided that the second half of the verse and the chorus were busy enough that it didn't really make sense to have a bunch of bits over them because there's like stuff constantly happening. It's very busy. It's a lot of stuff vocally, so decided we're just going to stick with Just Blow Me during this time, not add anything on top of it. So that was all fine. And then, because I wanted to bring the bits back, and kind of like how I did in the Journey medley where everything went on top of each other, I decided to do that kind of thing here as well. So after the chorus ends once, then we go into the little ending bit, which in the original Blow Me has this la 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 la. Blow me one last kiss. And so that's still happening, but I put, particularly because there's not too many words happening anymore, I felt like, okay, here's a good time where we can put all these other things on top of it. So it was kind of like, okay, which things are going to work? Now, the chord progression here is, it's the same chords as is in the verse, but technically the chords happen at different times. Before it was... Now during the chorus, it changes more quickly. But for the most part, basically due to the reasons that I already described, this ended up working out fine for like all of these bits are pretty much the same as what I used earlier. I'm using a little bit more of What About Us. Once, like, the whole thing is based off, it dances along the notes of a G chord, so it works out fine. It's kind of like mostly dancing around the G chord again with some other things thrown in there. And in this case, the it's very, very close to Blow Me One Last Kiss. So he was like, okay, well, this is definitely going to work because it's nearly the same idea anyway. And it does work out with like at that point we're on the C chord, so it makes sense to do da, 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 da. Those are all on a C chord, except for that, not quite, but it's just a passing note, so it's fine. So yeah, so that thing works out, and the I'm coming up, that works out fine as well. I'm coming up, so you better get this party. But I wanted to have somebody singing the Blow Me One Last Kiss, so I had the tenors transition to that. And another reason why I had them do that is because I felt like like I said earlier, I considered having the started not change notes, because it's kind of like the sort of like the weakest part of how those two things fit together, the started. So I just started off, and okay, so tenors, okay, go ahead, tenors can sing the Blow Me One Last Kiss. Not to mention they already did so earlier in the song. Coming up, so you better get this party to blow me one last kiss. So yeah, and then we go back into the chorus, and that's that. So, so that is stuff I made notes about. Now, and that'll probably do it for the Pink medley, potentially. Now, if you want, if you have any questions about the Pink medley, feel free to ask that. And if people feel, if you have any particular questions about the previous medleys that have happened, so the Winter medley, Moana, Journey medley, any of those things, if you have any questions on those things, feel free to ask those as well. And if nobody has questions, then maybe I'll just mention a couple quick things about those medleys. But it's 8:40. We could like end before too long, so we won't go too much longer. But yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to get some water. Last train to London. What's that sound like? Checking out Last Train to London. I'm not sure what point of the at what point you said that comment F. I'm not really sure which part you were saying sounds like that. Not sure. Anyway, okay. I don't see any particular questions, so let me just look through these other medleys quick and see if I have any particular things to say. Journey medley. That was a couple. That was season 1. Let's see. Any Way You Want It sounded like a really good opener, so that's why I used that. The transition from Any Way You Want It into Wheel in the Sky kind of worked really well. So that one goes from G. And then Wheel in the Sky is in D minor, which is actually a pretty good, a pretty nice key to go to from G to D minor. That's kind of it makes sense. It's like a difference of a fourth or a fifth. So it seemed like there would probably be a good way to do that. And as it turned out, I used sort of the line that happens. sky, and it just kind of like it just so happened like I figured out that it would work out if I like used that line of any way you want it, transitioning into the da 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 of Wheel in the Sky. It worked out pretty well. Let's see. We're going to do the fast intro at the beginning of the song. All right. I meant what in pink was I playing? But anyway. Let's see. Into lights. For the Journey medley for lights, I went from. I got this pulled up actually. Here we go. Going from lights into open arms. Lights is a triplet feel. Whoa, whoa. And while it's actually it's actually not really the same sort of 3 feel, but open arms is also. So I think that was like my original thought was like, oh, these are both triplet feels. I'm going to put them together. Now, as it works out, because like the triplet feel of the one is way faster than the triplet feel of the other, I didn't actually like make too much use of that idea, but that was kind of why I had initially decided to make those two transition into each other, I think. I also like definitely looked at the keys of all these songs that I put in the Journey medley and used that to determine what order I was going to put things in. Let's see. I had to do a vocal transition from Open Arms into Faithfully. I had to tweak the melody coming out of that. Let's see what is. Where are we? So this transition going from Faithfully into Separate Ways. Normally Faithfully would go to, but because that previous chord that's an E chord, and Separate Ways starts on E minor. So I had the melody line continue doing what it was doing, but then right there, it works out that it can work out for an E minor chord as well. The B is in both the, obviously B is part of a B chord, but it's also part of the E minor chord. So it worked well vocally to do that as a transition. And once again, I didn't have anybody actually sing the G minor, the G natural, which is the difference between the old key and the new, a difference between the old key and the new key. The G sharp in an E chord versus the G natural in an E minor chord. I don't have anybody singing the G natural until a few measures into it once they've got the key a little better down. Okay. And then into Don't Stop Believin', and then I started layering everything on top of each other. And like part of this, it worked out via all this layering. Okay. Yeah, I was just looking at F's comment. Sorry. Yeah, so then when I started to layer everything on here, and if we change it to the new key, which is Don't Stop Believing, which is an E, the Don't Stop Believing chords, we've got E, C minor, and it kind of turns out that the pretty much is the same chords as any way you want it if you change the key of it. Any way you want it, that's the way you need it, any way you want it. So that in that case, I could keep the harmonies and everything the same because the chord progression was the same. So that's if you're going to keep the harmonies all the same and such, then yeah, you'll probably want the chord progression to match a little better. In this case, they did. Any way you wanted chord progression, don't stop believing chord progression, basically the same thing. I already talked about adjusting this whoa instead of whoa. And then we go into Don't Stop Believing, and then I come to you with open arms, nothing to hardly what I say. Come to you with open arms, nothing to hardly what I say. But the original would have been come to you with open arms, nothing to hardly what I say. It's actually significantly different. But just because of the notes, once again, they're kind of sticking along the main notes of the key because they are doing that. It ended up working out with the chords in Don't Stop Believing as well. Let's see. Moana, I didn't have any sort of mashup things. I did have to do some kind of quirky key change transitions. Because I kind of had a certain order that I wanted to put these Moana songs in. So I didn't do a whole lot of like pushing them around based off of the key changes that I would need. I knew I wanted to end with How Far I'll Go, so I was like, okay, well, that's going at the end. I felt like this, we read the wind and the sky, sun is high. I felt like that made a good opening song. And yeah, so I kind of like didn't want to mess with the order too much, so I kind of had to like play around with some of these keys a bit more. Let's see. Going from We Know the Way into Consider the Coconuts, whatever that song's called. That's going, you can see here, this key is 3 sharps and the new key is 4 sharps. So that's kind of nice. That means that it's probably going to be a fairly easy key change to do. So what do we got? So this, what do we got? So we're in A, but this measure here is in E. But it's an E chord rather. And it's kind of transitioning back to A. But the chord doesn't really change until the next measure. But since we're going to the key of E, I was like, okay, well, let's just go back to there. So like, and that kind of worked pretty well as a transition there. Let's see. And then we go from the Coconuts. This was, I had to do some funky things to get here. So to going from the key of E to the key of C, that was a bit more of a tricky transition. So let's see what I did here. Let's see. That would be what normally happens. But I knew I had to get to C. And I kind of, is this what I did here? What did I do here? I did, yeah, so the dominant chord of the key of C is G. And, which is not really part of the key of E. But, so we're going along F sharp minor, G sharp minor, A. Normally it goes B, E, 5, 1. But instead I do F sharp minor, G sharp minor, A. I decided A was okay to go down to G, which then leads to C. A, just dropping everything down a step. A, G, C. That was the key change I decided to go with. Now with the track, because I still had the track of the old song going at this point, I actually had to transpose this particular part of the track. So And I'm trying to remember what I did. I think, because at that point in the song, it would have been like a B chord, transposing that down to a G chord. That's going down a major third. And like the program I was using, I think it was having issues doing that. So I might, let's see. I might have actually used the A chord again and just transposed it down a whole step. And because it was kind of like a transition, I was like, this sounds a little messy, but I'm going to go with it just because it's like the vocals are happening on top of this. People aren't going to be listening that close to the track. So the track actually gets a little messy here because I had to like adjust things to make the key change that I wanted to happen to work. And then you're welcome into Shiny. That's going from the key of C to the key of G. That's a pretty easy transition. That it kind of like the melody pickup notes just work really well to transition into that new key, and there's no F sharps that happen for a while, so that wasn't really a worry vocally. Let's see. And then coming out of Shiny, let's see. And then we're going into in the key of E, but sort of like in the instrumental intro to what is this? How Far I'll Go. There's just kind of like a soft chord there, and I have nothing happening vocal here, so that the soloist could hear Shiny. And then I don't remember exactly what that chord is, but I kind of like went to a chord that seemed like it made sense. I think it might have gone to like sort of like the A chord, but then it kind of like transitions into, I don't know, somehow it like transitioned into that, and it wasn't too bad because I didn't have anything vocally happening. I kind of have it like resting. This is kind of one of those like rest out of the one song and rest and jump into the new song moments. Not as much of a transition here. So yeah, so that's Moana medley. Winter medley was a big thing. I had to do some. I think I had to do some like clever things as to like where in like, for example, going into the Winter Wonderland bit, I had to like be sort of creative as to like where in Winter Wonderland I was starting. I didn't really start at like necessarily like the beginning of the intro. It was kind of like partway through the intro because it like worked out better where it was coming, where the key of the song that it was coming from, 6 sharps. So it was coming from, what was that, F sharp, going into, I guess that's going in a, so it's 6 sharps, which happens to be essentially the same key, as far as the piano is concerned anyway. It's the same key as 6 flats. So while it says 6 sharps, it's also the same as 6 flats. So going from 6 flats to 5 flats was actually not too bad, but I had to like make sure it transitioned at the right spot. And then went from 5 flats to 4 flats. Once again, they're kind of close. The trickiest thing there was probably the meter change, going from a 4 feel to a 3 feel. Although actually this was kind of a jazzy triplet feel, so that probably helped things a little bit there. 4 flats to 3 flats. Hey, these key changes actually worked out pretty well. Want to build a snowman. Back to 4 flats for Hanukkah. And then 4 flats to 1 flat, which kind of looks weird, but it's actually just going from minor to major, I believe. Yeah, so like the Hanukkah. It's in F minor. And this other Hanukkah song was in F major. So that key change worked out really nicely. And then I had to be a little creative as to how to get F. to get into that song, I had to figure out exactly where I was starting the one song and ending the other song. But yeah, so I don't know. That's brief comments on some of those transitions. So if nobody else has any questions, then I will stop the stream very briefly. I will give you a minute or so for the stream to catch up with what I'm actually doing so that I don't accidentally cut somebody off who does have a question. All right, so if I don't see anything in the next little bit, then I hope you all have a good week or however long it is until we chat again. The treasure, I've got the audio of the treasure that I'm working on, and I pretty much lined everybody's audio up. And even without messing everything, it already sounds really cool. So we have high hopes for how the treasure video is going to turn out. So thanks for submitting for that, for those of you who did. And anybody watching in, just because they're watching my channel, we'll have a new Mario Jazz song coming up soon. And I don't know if we figured out for sure what we're doing next week, but I'm sure we'll have something for you next week for all you here to sing people. So, bye-bye.